I love to tell the Exodus story on Labor Day because Moses was the first labor organizer in the story of our people. And there's a lot to learn in that story about how we can better organize today. As the story goes, Moses was born of a slave woman, an Israelite, at a time when the ruling class was killing off the newborn Israelite babies because they were growing too numerous and perhaps they would be too powerful. But through a strange series of events, Moses ends up being adopted by a member of Pharaoh's household, and he is actually raised in the king's home. And so he grows up with the beliefs and the values of privilege, and he has internalized those beliefs. And all seems to go well for him until he's an adult, and something happens. He discovers that he is one of them. He discovers who his real parents are. And that is really the beginning of the end of the empire. There's a story, an old Jewish story, about a rabbi. And he has a number of his students gathered around him. And he asks them the question, how do you know when the night has gone and the daylight has arrived? And one student raises his hand and says, is it when you can see the tree off in the distance? Rabbi says, no. Another student says, is it when you can see the fruit on the tree off in the distance? Rabbi says, no. The rabbi says, it is when you can look into the eyes of another human being and see yourself. Until you can do that, you are still in the darkness. And so when Moses looks into the eyes of the slaves, and he sees that he is one of them, that his destiny is tied up with theirs, and is that as long as they are enslaved, he is enslaved. And until they are free, he will not be free. So there's several lessons that we can take from this story. The first lesson is that God takes sides. I think we all like to believe in a God that loves everybody equally and never takes sides, but God takes sides. He is on the side of the poor and the vulnerable, and he is opposed to those who are rich and powerful, who create situations of injustice. So that's the first lesson. The second lesson is that God then calls people who are members of the privileged class, members of the rich and the powerful, of the elite, and he calls them to become traitors. He calls them to look into the eyes of the poor and to see themselves, and to abandon the beliefs and the values of the privileged life, and to use their wealth and their power to serve the poor. I just came across an interesting story the other day about Warren Buffett and how he's actually meeting with senators now to increase taxes on people like himself. And of course the senators treat him like a pariah. They don't really know what to do with him. Perhaps that could be an example of somebody who is rich and powerful becoming a traitor. The way that God calls us to be. The third lesson in the Exodus story is for those of us who are part of the struggle. That it won't be easy. The first time that Moses confronted Pharaoh, he actually made things worse for the Israelites. They had to make the same number of bricks that they did before, only now because of Moses' meddling in their situation, now they have to make them without straw. So Pharaoh, in a very sophisticated way, was trying to turn the people against Moses. It was a tough struggle. It was organized wealth against organized people. It was the values of an empire against the values of a community. It was the god of greed against the god of the common good. And it was a knock-down, drag-out, fight-to-the-death struggle if there ever was one. Plagues, destruction, death, rivers turned to blood, serpents eating serpents. How's that for a power image? But in the end, Pharaoh agrees to Moses' demand, "Let my people go." And then it's happily ever after, right? Not quite. You see, even change for the better is inconvenient. At least while they were slaves, they had been slaves for something like 400 years. They knew what to expect in that economic system. And they didn't know what to do with their newfound freedom. And so, even though they were free from Pharaoh's hand, they spent 40 years wandering in the desert, trying to develop a new economy, a new way of living. And some of them wanted to go back. At least they knew what to expect under Pharaoh's regime. And so those are the lessons, I think, that we can take with us from the Exodus story. One, if we find ourselves in positions of privilege or power, God calls us to become traitors and to join the side that God is on, namely the poor and the vulnerable. And if we are part of the struggle, we should recognize that even change for the better is inconvenient, and the struggle will be hard. All right, how do I turn it off?
Still going?
Yeah.